right, we're going to get Lawton Swann on. Lawton has a radio show there in South Carolina dedicated just to the Clemson Tigers. If you call up and Daddy try to talk about the Gamecocks, he'll hang up on you. He only wants to talk Clemson. Good morning, Lawton. How you doing?
Gentlemen, doing well. Glad to be on with you.
I wanted to ask you, we talked last night, and I could kind of, I'm over here in Tuscaloosa, so the only thing I get maybe is the Alabama spin and the fans saying how Alabama's going to do this, that, and the other. But when I talked to you last night, I kind of sensed two things. One, that the Clemson people, not necessarily you, but they feel like they still haven't gotten the respect across the country. People maybe think it's a fluke, and that you really believe that Clemson has a great shot to win this football game. Can you comment on both those?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the Clemson fans at least kind of feel like they've been slighted by the major networks, whether it's ESPN or Fox. They just kind of get the feeling, hey, we've been number one since the beginning of the college football playoffs initial release, and then you sit here today and you still see the Tigers as 6.5-point underdogs to Alabama, and I don't think they intend to feel that way, to take anything away from what Alabama's done, but I do think they felt slighted going into that Oklahoma game, being 3.5-point underdogs, and the way Clemson ran away with it, winning by 20. I think they look at this matchup and they say, hey, we're just as good as Alabama. We'll go out on the field and play. But again, Vegas, we kind of understand that too. They want to make money. They want to get people coming in on these lines. So that's the first and foremost of your question. Secondly, I think when you look at this Clemson team, I think they're built to compete with a team like Alabama. And I think having a coach like Dabo Swann, who played at Alabama on the 1992 national championship team, understands the brand. I think Clemson will be well prepared for this game. And they've done a marvelous job this season in overcoming adversity and injuries and sitting there undefeated and awaiting the Crimson Tide. I tell you, I don't think you could build a better storyline.
Well, when we talked last night, everybody talks about Alabama's defense, their front four, really their front 10. They roll them in there left and right. But you felt like Clemson could run the football against Alabama and be successful. I think some of their players even said, hey, yeah, I know they've stopped the run, but they haven't gone up against an offense like ours. How can Clemson run the football in Alabama?
Well, I think the big key is Clemson does a really good job of giving Deshaun Watson opportunities, and that gives them an extra hat in the box and creates an advantage also when you run the little zone read play and you give it to a guy like Wayne Gallman. Gallman broke the single-season rushing record at Clemson this season. He's just a sophomore, and it's a very young team, and I think they're young and hungry, and sometimes, being that way, you might not know better, and so they'll go into this matchup against Alabama, and I think some of Deshaun Watson and what he's able to do will surprise a lot of people. And I don't think Alabama's seen a quarterback on par with Deshaun Watson. I didn't think Oklahoma had either, and I think late in that game you started to see some breakdowns in Oklahoma's defense. And if you get that same thing happening against Alabama, then Clemson could have a lot of success on the ground.
Yeah.
Well, there's a feeling over here that Alabama will go back to Henry a great deal and run him a lot of times. They had the ability to take Henry out of it themselves and play wide and play down the field. Is this? And I'm not sure that this Clemson team. Dabo's a great buddy of mine. I don't know that this Clemson team is good enough to take Henry on a 35 or 40 carry game. I think that could be a little bit of a problem with Clemson.
Well, and I think a lot of people would point to maybe Dalvin Cook or Samaje Perine in the Orange Bowl, where Perine only had 58 yards, and I know he got injured on a couple of plays there. But again, I think Dabo Swann and the Tiger staff, they had a name circled on the top of their recruiting board. It was Christian Wilkins, and it wasn't like Christian Wilkins' most notable play in the Orange Bowl was something he did defensively. It was the reception he had on a fake punt. But here's a kid, 315 pounds. He can do a backflip. He's just a dynamic player. Alabama's loaded with guys like that. But the Tigers had him targeted, circled, had exclamation points by his name. They knew that if they could get a kid like that in the middle, that they could compete for a national championship. He's come in, and as a true freshman, he's been phenomenal this year. They've built this defense to withstand, I think, a tough running attack like Alabama's. And then they've got skill position players on the back end, I think, that'll match up well against Ridley and the lights for the Crimson Tide as well. So I think we're in for a heck of a matchup. I can't wait for Monday.
Does Clemson play a lot of man-to-man? As they do, I heard people talking about they had a guy that when I was at the Michigan State game and when I watched the teams warm up and watched the first couple of possessions, they had nobody with speed that could stay with Ridley. Who does Clemson have that can take him one-on-one? I've heard people say the Clemson's got a guy that can take him out or come close to it. Who is that? And do they play a lot of man-to-man defense?
They do play a lot of man, and what they've been doing a lot lately is playing a lot of nickel to get a little extra athleticism out there on the field. And the guy you're talking about is Mackenzie Alexander. The Tiger fans kind of call him Mac Island because he just locks people up. He's a kid in 2 years at Clemson's only given up a couple of receptions. Many people say he's as businesslike as any Tiger player they've seen going back to Sammy Watkins just from this film study and recognition. And he understands that his opportunity for success, perhaps as far as financial success in life, is determined out on the football field. His parents both work in a tomato field in the summers in Florida, and he gets it. He understands that he's got a chance to make something of himself. He's done a great job with that. And then on the back end of that secondary, you're talking about T.J. Green and J-Ron Kearse, two guys whose heights combined are about 13 feet. They're 6'5" and 6'4" each, and you're talking about a lot of long length in the secondary. And the thing about Kearse, he can come up to the line of scrimmage as well. He's a big kid, a physical freak, kind of like his uncle Javon Kearse was at Florida.
And that God has a great sense of humor by putting him against Alabama. Kind of talk about those connections, and there's a lot of good feelings probably between these two universities.
Sure, going back to Frank Howard, who played at Alabama under Wallace Wade way back in the late 1920s, 1930s, on through the success of Danny Forge. 5 coaches at Clemson, and over half of Clemson's all-time victories. The Tigers just went over 700 wins this season. I think I read earlier this week 366 of those have been coached by former Crimson Tide football players. So there's a ton of connections, and even for a guy like me whose family goes back to Clemson, back in 1908 when my great-grandfather went to school there. But my father's family, they were all Alabama people. They were all Alabama fans from the state of Alabama and just made their way to South Carolina working at International Paper. So it's one of those things where, for me, my dad's always kind of giving me a little grief. My grandmother's has passed away many years ago. But he says, Miss Willie's listening when you talk bad about the Crimson Tide.
All right, Lawton, before we let you go, give us the score and who's going to win this football game. I guess when you give the score, we're going to know who you think. How's this thing going to play out on Monday night?
I think Alabama's going to be a little bit surprised at how good Deshaun Watson can throw the deep ball. It's something we hadn't even gotten into here. And ultimately, I think Clemson's offensive line is going to have to play well. Defense, I feel good about. They've been solid all season, whether it's against Florida State, Notre Dame, and on down the line, especially Oklahoma. I mean, holding the Sooners at 17 was equally as impressive, in my opinion, as Alabama holding Michigan State to no points. I've picked the Tigers to win every game this season. They've won every game this season. I don't see that changing. They're undefeated for a reason. I'll take Clemson to go out there and knock off the Crimson Tide 27-21.
27-21, Clemson Tigers. If that happens, or even if it doesn't happen, we're going to have you back on next week, and we'll discuss the game. It won't be a bunch of talk in a bit. The results will be in, but we appreciate Lawton you being on with us this morning.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, had a lot of fun. Y'all, best of luck to you, and I know you guys will be rooting for the Crimson Tide.